I've never had a horror story from Snapchat before, so here we go. Was going to run Curse of Strahd, but apparently I'm a bad DM for not letting my player be the son of Strahd? So here's the player talking. Second off, how does it make it any better if he's the son of any other god in the world? Third off, that single fact doesn't make him any more important than any other character concept. D&D is about us being able to live our fantasies. Everyone's character concept, no matter how wacky or dramatic, is valid as long as it doesn't break the rules of the game, which I am not. Your position is not to dictate to us what our characters can or cannot be, it's to facilitate a fun game and a coherent narrative with what we bring to the table. Nothing about my character inherently prevents anyone from having fun or breaking the narrative as long as I play in the rules and prioritize the others over myself, which I plan to do. You've never even DM'd for us, so what's the harm in giving me a chance? You can be long-winded and articulate, but still say so little. So my best friend, and at the time DM, had purchased Curse of Strahd and asked a friend of ours to run it. This friend, B, had a revolving interest in DMing and wasn't exactly excited to run the game. However, he agreed because he enjoyed the story. Now, my friend asked B out of necessity and not because he was particularly good at DMing. We didn't know anyone else to run the game and, at the time, didn't think to look online for other groups. We made characters with one of my friend's coworkers. I made a Firbolg Druid, my friend made a Scourge ASMR Paladin, and the coworker made a Human Ranger. Right off the bat, B is mocking our characters and being passive-aggressive about the choices we made. He thinks Ranger is a trash class, so I already hate this guy. He told my friend that he wasn't playing his Paladin heroically enough, and he was legit angry that I chose a Firbolg. Apparently, he hates the 5e version with a passion, and he let me know every chance he could. That was the first red flag of our doomed campaign. The second red flag was when B disregarded everyone's backstories in favor of his DM PC, Indrid, finding all of us when we were young and we formed this little family. I was confused because my Firbolg was much older than everyone else, so how could that even work? My objections were promptly ignored and the session started. It was weird because B kept on trying to play Indrid like we had gone on all these adventures beforehand, but me and the other players had nothing to go on, so it made things really awkward. So we start out with Indrid wanting to join a mercenary group. So naturally, we wanted to join too. After talking to some people in town, we came across a drunk man in a tavern ranting and raving about werewolves on his farm. We talked to him and accept his job offer, kill said werewolves and bring back their heads, and he'll give us the rest of his money. Okay, so far so good. Except we ran into a revenant. The ranger had no idea what it was, but the second B described it, the paladin and I immediately backed out. We had to convince Ranger to not attack it. This was the random encounter that B rolled out, and, of course, it was the worst possible outcome. We were all level 1, and Indrid had the stats of a goon, so she was virtually useless in battle. We managed to avoid the revenant and made it to the drunk man's farm. There was some weird stuff there, but one thing that annoyed me was the fact that despite my being invisible to check out the place, there were suddenly birds everywhere that followed me around. They could basically see through the invisibility. The reason why this irritated me? B had complained beforehand that Firbolgs get way too much free crap as their racial traits and stuff, so this felt like BS ways to ignore one of those traits, the invisibility, but I didn't call him out on it, mostly because I didn't have time to. We were then promptly jumped by 5 werewolves. Most of our session was fighting these werewolves, and during the fight, we all went down at least once, and we were all gored by them. Yeah, we figured that one of us was going to turn at some point. Despite the battle being stupid, cause hello, we were level 1 and this encounter definitely felt like a TPK attempt, we tried to roll with it. The third red flag was when it started raining, and we ran inside the house for shelter. B said we needed to grab these werewolves' heads because the bodies were slowly changing back to human. The paladin and I go out, and we both get 1 level of exhaustion for cutting the heads off, which fine, that makes sense since it was raining and we had all been through a tough fight. The Ranger and Indred got a level 2 for checking the house to see if it was safe. What was BS was that we get another level of exhaustion for just walking back to the house. I was getting pissed off because for the Ranger, that was the second time playing D&D, and this is how B decided to introduce exhaustion? B tells us that we did get enough XP to level up twice, which is awesome. We take a long rest in the house, and by the next morning we check to see if we can change our stats. Now, B knew that we weren't familiar with exhaustion. It had never come up during any of our other sessions, and he smugly told us that taking that one long rest only got rid of one level of exhaustion. We would have to take another long rest, 2 for the Paladin and I, before we could level up. At this point, we were pissed and drained from the session and called it quit for the night. The Paladin and Ranger then asked if I could talk to B and see if he was just going to TPK our party because the session was not fun. And I do ask him, dude, are you trying to kill us? Just to get out of DMing? No one is going to play if your game is just a TPK. I would never intentionally pull a TPK, was his only response. I knew exactly what he meant. He would never cheat to kill our characters. He would use his vast knowledge of the game and make it as hard as possible for us, and if we die, then it would be our fault. At the time, we knew that Curse of Strahd was a hard module, so we didn't make a big fuss over what happened. It wasn't until much later that we realized how full of crap B truly was. Our next session was our last one. The Ranger couldn't make it, so it was just me and the Paladin. We take the heads back to town plus a lot of loot from the house. B gave us a lot of money and items, but most of those items were useless to us since they were for classes that none of us had. Yay. Paladin and I confront the drunk man about what happened and about how he led us there to, die. You know the whole routine. And then he turns out to be a werewolf. Just a reminder that we got no benefits from our long rest. That was just to get rid of the exhaustion, so the fight was pretty one-sided. The werewolf took some nasty swipes at us, and before we could even hit him, another friggin' werewolf breaks through the door into the tavern. The two fight it out until the two of us fall unconscious. We wake up in a shack in the woods. Both the Paladin and myself discover that, to no surprise, we are infected, and B has us fight each other. Like, he told us, our characters, that we were mad at each other and had to fight. Okay, screw it. I channel my aggression through the druid and lay into the Paladin. I later told the Paladin that none of what I said was directed at him. It was directed at B. My friend made the choice to have the Paladin be emotionally closed off, so he walked away. Alright, it was some good RP, but the one interesting thing that happened was quickly ruined when B ended the session. He then told my friend that his Paladin had changed alignments because of the fight that the DM B made happen, and because of that, he had to hand over his character sheet and make a new character? B told him that he was going to hold on to his Paladin until he could play him properly, and with that same breath introduced a reputation system for our group that had just split up because he told us to fight each other. That was the last time we ever asked him to DM anything. The whole thing was just an ego trip for him. He spent more time bullying our characters than building the story. He ignored our characters as we made them and tried to play them for us at times. The thing that pissed me off most was him holding our XP hostage. We jumped through so many hoops only to get nothing in return. Another great example of this was our session zeros that happened for me and my friend. My friend's session was pretty nice, if not tragic. His mother was killed by a vampire and his village was attacked when he was a child. He tried to get help only for that to fail and eventually ran into Indred, who saved him by taking him down into the sewers. They had a sweet moment where he shared his birthday gift, an apple, with her. I watched the session and was excited for mine. B took all my notes about my character and promptly threw them in the garbage. I told him that my furbolg had lost her village due to some attack and she ran into the woods. She was then picked up by a werebear who went on to be her mentor. I chose Circle of Dreams, so I wanted to include a connection to the Feywild, so I settled on living in some ancient ruins in a little grove. It made sense to me because I was also a hermit background. B ignored all of this, and instead my village was killed by vampires too, and I was adopted by humans when I was really little. My new parents and new village were then attacked by vampires, and everything I knew and loved was destroyed again by the same thing. The only good thing that came out of this was a unicorn foal that I could give away to some witches in the woods because I knew B would try to kill it too. In the end, Indrid pulled me into the sewers, and that's the end of my backstory. Notice the difference between sessions? I didn't even have a chance to have a nice moment with my character's parents. B set the scene and told me to roll a perception check. Within 2 minutes, I was fighting a vampire to get him off my mother, who died a slow, painful death in my arms. I also had none of my racial traits, because B doesn't like them. B's reasoning for this was that I had no one to teach me anything, end of story. I also lost my powerful build. At that point, I was just done, because I was playing a furbolg that couldn't do anything, and my entire life was burned to the ground. Again. The whole session was demeaning, especially once B described in great detail just how crap my furbolg was after she was pulled into the sewers. The whole campaign felt needlessly cruel, from B belittling every choice we made to the unfair encounters to telling a player that they couldn't play their character anymore because they weren't doing it right. I don't want people to think that we bullied him into DMing because we didn't. We simply asked him, and he could have said no. However, the only good thing to come out of this was now we know the signs of someone being a bad DM. I wish I could say that he was better as a player, but he wasn't. He was just as horrible as a player. He was that guy who min-maxed every character he made, metagamed at every turn, and tried to force players to play their characters the way he wanted them to. Honestly, I'm glad we don't play with him anymore. D&D is a nice chance to escape reality. Why would we play a game that is just as cruel and bleak? I want to say that we had some explosive blowout, that I hurled every insult at him for being such a crappy DM player in person, but life doesn't work out that way. We definitely had a quiet falling out. He finally learned that his bad attitude had consequences, and he just phased out of the group. Boy, oh boy, that might be the worst one yet, or at least it's in the top 10. This DM is going out of their way to bully their players. It's not an unintentional thing or a habit that they just didn't grow out of. I mean, it seems like they're going out of their way to hurt the feelings of their own friends, which is pretty terrible. Don't bully your players into submission. I'm pretty sure most people already know that. The party did the right thing here and left as soon as they started to figure out that this was not a campaign that would turn into something enjoyable. Remember, this is a game we play for fun. You're not obligated to be miserable in order to achieve that fun. If your game is bad and toxic, you can leave. That is the best thing you can do. It's not your job to help the DM to improve or to assist them in making their game better. That's their problem. Your problem is the toxic game, and fixing that problem is often done by simply leaving. The more interesting discussion here is about XP. Yes, XP is definitely something you don't want to hold hostage. That's never any fun. Allow your players to reap the rewards of a hard combat, especially something of that caliber. 5 werewolves against level 1s, I have no idea how they got that, but holding XP or rewards hostage after a difficult encounter like that, it just feels unrewarding. It is unrewarding for players. It's not fun. And my final point is something we've discussed multiple times, but it's worth reiterating. Allow players to write their backstories. Most DMs do know this, but sometimes we get carried away in the backstories we envision for a player character. We hear the pitch, and then we develop all these ideas in our heads, and then when the backstory comes, we want it to fit the idea that we've already developed. I know I've done that in the past. My head is stuck in this idea that I've built for their character. But quite frankly, my idea for their character doesn't really matter. It's their character. As long as it's not inappropriate or something absolutely ridiculous like what we had in the intro, the player should be allowed to create their character the way they want, to build their own fantasy. That's the point of this game. This DM, in every way, has shattered the entire purpose of Dungeons & Dragons, and it is really sad. Alright, well, if you guys enjoyed this episode of RPG Horror Stories, then please do leave a like. If you want to see more episodes of this series as well as my other content, then please do subscribe to Crispy's Tavern. And finally, if you want to leave your own thoughts or stories, go down to the comments down below. In essence, like, comment, subscribe. I will see you all next time. Farewell.